am so glad that all of you are here. I also want to welcome all of our live streamers from all over the place. Okay, we've got North and South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Washington, D.C., we've got Louisiana, Texas, California, Colorado, New Jersey, Alaska, Wyoming, Minnesota, Illinois, Maryland, and Massachusetts. Woo! I love that no matter where you're at, you can be a part and join in church. That's so awesome. I love it. Well, I'm a little bit sad and a little bit happy today. I'm a little bit sad because this is the last message in our series, Summer Classics. So that makes me a little bit sad because I've absolutely loved this series. We've been going through talking about all the classics in the Bible, just some really good stick-to-your-ribs stories. So we've been going through, we've been talking about those, and I'm a little bit sad too because that means summer's coming to an end, but I'm a little bit happy because that means school starts tomorrow. Woo! Yeah, excited about that. I love school. So today, like I said, we're going to be taking on that Summer Classics. We're going to be talking about Gideon, and Gideon is one of my favorite people in the Bible. I love the fact that he's this mighty warrior, but he didn't start off as a mighty warrior. He started off just like you and me, a person that had choices to make in his life, and he had to decide if he was going to make the right choice. Because how many of you know that you are the person you are today because of the choices that you made yesterday? So Gideon made some choices in his life, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 8 of Judges, and we're going to pull out 10 godly leadership principles from Gideon's story. But I actually could have pulled out like 100. There were so many, so I'll let you go, and I'll let you read all the others on your own, but I'm just going to pull out 10 for you. And when I talk about leadership, some of you automatically wanted to check out on me. Because you say, well, that's not me, I'm not a leader. But I just want you to know that if you're a mom, you're a leader. If you're a dad, you have a family that you are leading. It's not just for the CEO in the corner office or the guy that goes to work in the high rise. You are a leader. If you're a student and you go to school, whether you're in college or high school, you can be a godly leader. So we're going to learn today 10 principles on godly leadership. And in this particular time in history, the Israelites were going through a difficult time. They had come out of Egypt, but they had a time where they were in the promised land, but because they started worshiping false idols, they went right back to where they were before, and now they're dealing with poverty, they're dealing with persecution, and they're feeling extremely powerless at this time in history. So what God does is he calls a leader by the name of Gideon. And at the time, Gideon isn't leading. As a matter of fact, Gideon's hiding. And the reason he's hiding is because the Midianites would come in and take everything that the Israelites had. They would always come in at the harvest time, and when they were harvesting, the Midianites would come in, they'd take their crops, they'd take their animals, they'd take their possessions, and isn't that just like the enemy? Right when it's harvest time in your life, he wants to come in and try to steal from you. So that's what was happening. They didn't have much of anything. As a matter of fact, Gideon is hiding because of that. What they would normally do is when the crops would come in, they would go on top of this really big hill. They'd take these huge stones and they'd roll it over top of the hill, and those stones would separate the wheat and the chaff because the chaff would get blown away by the wind because it was on the top of the hill. But they couldn't do that at this period of time because the Midianites would have found them. So they had to hide what little bit that they did have. How many of you know if something's always being taken from you, you can't really store much up, right? So they didn't have a whole lot. And what they did have, he was in this wine press, and the wine press was carved out of a rock because they were hiding in rocks, living in caves. They were doing anything they could just to stay hidden from the Midianites because they were constantly coming in and taking over. So they weren't feeling so great about who they are at this particular time. And God says, you know what? I need a leader. I need somebody to rise up. And the reason they were in all this trouble is because there was a leader that didn't rise up before because they had built idols. And how many of you know whenever there's an idol in your life, whatever area it is, God can't bless that area. So if we have a relationship and it's not a godly relationship and we ask God to bless it, guess what? He can't bless it. If we have a partnership, it's not a godly partnership, and we ask God to bless it, guess what? he can't bless it. In our finances, if we want God to bless them, but we don't put God first, he has to step back. So that's what's going on with the Israelites. And you can always tell when something is going on when it's persistent. If you've persistently had marriage problems, persistently had financial problems, whenever there is a persistent problem, it's always a sign of sin. Anytime there was famine in the Bible, it was always a sign of sin. Now that's different than us who go through challenges or tests. When you go through a challenge or a test, it doesn't mean that it's sin, but it's situational. It's not an extended famine where it's always going on. You can't ever get out from underneath of it. Whenever you see that, there's always a result because of sin. So they have been in sin, and they're asking God to bless them, but God will never bless an idol. God can't bless an idol. He will never bless something that comes before him. So they're struggling. It's been 7 years that they're struggling, and they're just having a really difficult time. But God goes and he finds Gideon, and he finds Gideon in the wine press, like I was saying, and he's hiding. He's hiding out, and God calls him, and Gideon decides that he's going to heed the call of God on his life because Gideon is a leader. So here we go, 10 godly leadership traits, or you can call them leadership choices. The first one is godly leaders aren't fearless. They just do it afraid. In Judges chapter 6, verse 11, I want to read to you because many times what we think of in our life is we see people that do big things, whether it's in business or in ministry. We see them do big things and we think that, oh man, they're just so courageous. They're just so bold. They don't fear. No, no, no. I've never known anyone. I was talking to a Marine out in the lobby after the first service, and himself included. I've never known anyone that has gone out and fought a battle that was not afraid. But you can choose to do it anyway. You can still go fight despite your fear. And he told me, he goes, you know, they try to teach us that we don't have fear in us. He goes, the truth is that we're all afraid. We just do what you said. We do it anyway. Will you still do what God called you to do, even if you feel fear? Even if you feel fear. Let's look at what happened with Gideon. Chapter 6, verse 11. It says, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree. And the angel of the Lord is just the triophany here. It's really the pre-incarnate Jesus. It says, the angel of the Lord sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abezerite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. And Gideon said to him, oh my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has this happened to us? And where are all of his miracles to which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and he said, go in the might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Have I not sent you? So he said to him, oh my Lord, can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh. How can I when I'm the least in my father's house? Doesn't that sound like us sometimes? When God calls us to do something and we give him the whole list of why we can't do it? Because of our family history, because of what's happened. And what God is saying, listen, despite all of that, do it. But do it afraid if you need to. Everything that Gideon was saying, he was feeling fear. He's going, if, why, where, I'm the weakest, I'm the least. Why are we going through all these harsh conditions? All of that rings of fear. Leadership is not the absence of fear, but it's a dependence on God. It doesn't mean that you won't be afraid when you face a battle. I think that's just a misnomer. We sometimes get in our minds, I can't do this because I'm dealing with fear. No. You can do it because God didn't put the fear in you. The enemy did, and you're going to fulfill the call of God on your life no matter what. So even if you feel fear, do it anyway. Do it anyway. You know, feeling fear, even when something amazing and wonderful happens, we can still feel fear, but we can do it anyway. I mean, Think about this. How many of you have children? When you brought that baby home from the hospital, it was the most exciting time of your life, but don't you dare tell me you didn't feel any fear. That's why you went every night and stood over the child to make sure they were still breathing, make sure they were okay. That's why you bought 25 ointments at the grocery store just to make sure everything was good. Okay, some of you don't have children, so you can't relate. Let me go to you another one. Okay, so you bought this new car, and you're all excited and you're joyful, but you get out and you take it on the road, and you're afraid somebody's going to touch your car, hit your car, bump your car, and you park it like 2 miles away in a parking space. You take a double spot so nobody can get near you because you're feeling a little bit of fear, but you're excited, but you're feeling fear, but you're excited. Do you know what I'm talking about? How about when you got ready to go down the aisle? Some of you are like, well, that was scary, you know. But when you get ready to go down the aisle, it's one of the most exciting days of your life, but yet it's like, oh. Or you go for that job interview, the job you've been believing for, but you're still a little bit afraid. Just do it anyway. Do it even if you feel afraid. Number 2, godly leaders are givers. Godly leaders are givers. I want you to look at chapter 6, verse 18. And I want you to see what happens. As soon as God calls Gideon out, calls this leader out of hiding, which some of you are leaders in hiding today. When he calls Gideon out, the first thing Gideon does is he's a giver. He gives to God. Verse 18, here he is. He's talking to the angel of the Lord. He says, do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you, and I bring out my offering, and I set it before you. And he said, I will wait until you come back, Gideon. So Gideon went in and he prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour and meat, and he put it in a basket, and he put broth in the pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree, and he presented them. The thing that's so amazing is if you do the math here and you understand what was happening in this period of time in history, in a complete, total, poverty-stricken scenario, this man went in and he baked 90 loaves of bread, and he brought it back, and he laid it on the altar with meat and broth. And the thing that's so significant about sacrifice is it's something that takes your time, your energy, your resources, but you don't get to partake of it. Godly leaders understand that they're givers. A godly leader always has the mark of a giver on their life. So the first thing he does before he can go out into battle is he has to get that straight. He goes out and he gives. And I love his heart, because here's the thing. When you're a leader, you've got to get very acquainted with sacrifice. That's right. I do not know a leader who is not acquainted with sacrifice. The boss who stays at the office late because one of the employees needs to talk or needs your help. Or the person who feels like they have a call of God on their life to minister, who lingers a little longer, who helps a little more. You will never see somebody who is a godly leader that does not have a life that's marked with giving and sacrifice. Sacrificing your time, your talent, your money, your energy. Doesn't matter what it is. And the thing that this is so amazing about the sacrifice that he gave is this wasn't like he was giving out of his excess. He was giving despite it. He knew what was most important, because when you allow God to bless the first, the rest gets blessed as well. So he gave his best. And God actually is the one who demonstrates for us giving, because God gave his best and he gave his son. God is a giving God. And so he gives his son Jesus, and what does Jesus do? Jesus does the same thing by giving his life. Godly leaders are givers. Godly leaders don't fight battles alone. Number 3, godly leaders do not fight battles alone. In Judges chapter 6, verse 16, we read that God was with Gideon. And it actually translates, that scripture actually translates that God was on him. Now, in the Old Testament, we know that God wasn't in people, he was on them. It wasn't until Jesus came and made a way for us where we could actually go into the Holy of Holies, so now Jesus can reside in us. But at this period of time, we know that God was with him because it says, literally, the translation is he was on him. So Gideon wasn't going into this battle alone. He was going with God. And the other thing that I love is in verse 27, just down a few verses, he goes in to tear down some idols because he realizes the reason they're in the situation that they are in is because of the idols. And so God says, listen, you got to give, and now you got to go get rid of the thing that's causing all this mess. So give first, now go tear down all of those idols. And Gideon goes in to tear down these idols, but Gideon doesn't go alone because a good leader, a godly leader knows you can't do it by yourself. You can't fight your battles alone. He takes 10 men with him to help him take down the idols. You need to take people on the journey with you. There are people that can help you in battle. Just bring them along, take them with you because you can't tear down all those idols by yourself. So he goes in and he gets some help. Then you drop down a little further, chapter 7, verse 10. It says he takes his armor bearer, Purah. They go and they scout out the enemy camp. Before they go and attack the Midianites, they go scout out the camp just to get a look and a feel for how everything is. And he took Purah with him. The reason he took Purah with him is Purah means branch. And I just want you to know that when you've got someone else who is fighting your battles with you, you can branch out and go way further than you could on your own. Take somebody else with you in your battle. God will bring you the right people. Many of us go, oh, no. I don't want to take anybody else with me. And the reason that we don't is because, man, we have to risk. It's vulnerable. Vulnerability and risk and exposure, those are all things that we have to face when we allow other people into our life, but it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it because you can't do it by yourself. Vulnerability is the most accurate measure of courage. It's the most accurate measure of courage. Number 4, godly leaders tear down strongholds. Godly leaders tear down strongholds. In Judges chapter 6, verse 25, I love this. It says, now it came to pass the same night is what? The same night that he gave his offering. He goes in and it says the Lord told him, now go take your father's young bull, because he's given another offering. Take the young bull and then a second bull of 7 years. Tear down those altars of Baal that your father has built. Tear them down, cut the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and take the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood and the image which you shall cut down. And then it says, Gideon took the 10 men and he accomplished that. One of the things we have to understand is godly leaders, we must go and tear down strongholds. Godly leaders tear down strongholds. And Gideon actually means he who cuts down. A godly leader is willing to go in and cut things down. And the thing that's so significant about this verse is he's got to go in and tear down family idols. He's got to go in and tear down things that his dad built. And it even says in this scripture that all of the neighborhood joined in worshiping these idols. So when Gideon goes and takes them down, not only was his dad mad at him, but all the hood was mad at him too. Everybody was mad at Gideon. But he did it anyway because he heard God's voice. So he goes and he takes down all of these idols. And the thing that can be difficult sometimes, because I started thinking, well, those idols had been there. Why didn't Gideon take them down before? But you know what can happen to us? Is sometimes idols in our lives, they can be so familiar. We can be so comfortable because we've camped around it for so long. We've sat around it for so long that it's become commonplace to us. But God is saying, listen, if you want to succeed in the battle, you can't do it with family idols. What could some family idols look like? Well, they could look like shame. Shame sneaks in there, man. Guilt. My family was really good at guilt trips. I don't know how many of you had a family member that was really good at guilt trips, but man, they could lay some serious guilt trips. What about addiction? addiction, a family idol that has to come down, anger, bitterness, sickness and disease. And whenever you see these things and they pass from family member to family member to family member, you know, dad is angry, so son is angry because grandfather was angry, because great-grandfather was angry. Tear down the idols. Let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of insecurity. Let's get rid of marriage issues, inferiority, jealousy, unforgiveness, envy. His family could have disowned him, but he didn't care. He wanted to do what God had asked him to do, because he couldn't have any victories in his life until he first tore down those idols. And I love what Max Lucado says. He said, someone that wants to lead the orchestra must learn to turn his back on the crowd. If you want to lead well, there are times where you're going to have to turn your back on the crowd, and it could even be the crowd of your own family. If you want to lead the way God has asked you to lead. Number 5, godly leaders watch for signs. They watch for signs. In chapter 6, in verse 36, Gideon is asking God for a sign. And godly leaders look for signs. And I'm going to explain what that means in just a moment. It says, so Gideon says to God, if you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said, look, I shall put a fleece of wool on this threshing floor. And if there is dew on this fleece only, and it is dry on all the ground, then I will know, God. I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said. And then he says to him, okay, and so it was. And then the next day, he asked God to do the same thing, but in reverse. Here's the thing I want you to understand about when I'm saying godly leaders watch for signs. Gideon didn't request a sign to determine God's will, because he already knew what God's will was. Gideon was asking for a sign because 2 things. 1, he was looking for a little bit of help with his confidence. Sometimes we just need a sign from God to give us that little bit of confidence that we need, that we can go and fight the battle that he's asked us to fight. The other thing that Gideon was looking for is he knew God was his deliverer, but he said, God, I want to make sure as I go fight this battle that your presence is with me. God, can you give me a sign of your presence? Godly leaders don't go into battle without the presence of God. Sometimes we got to look for that sign that God's presence is there, because we don't want to do it without it. There was also a dream that happened, and we're going to read about that in a little bit, but a dream that happened was another sign that gave Gideon this confidence boost that he could go and fight this battle because the presence of God was with Gideon. Number 6, godly leaders don't take the easy way out. Godly leaders do not take the easy way out. Judges chapter 7, verse 3, this is just such an awesome thing of what's going on, because it starts out where the Midianites are 135,000 and Gideon and his army are 32,000. The odds weren't so great at that time. Not a situation that most of us would particularly love. But something very interesting happens. When these 32,000 are together, God tells Gideon to say something to them, and he does. And this is what he says. God says, now therefore proclaim in the hearing of all of your 32,000 warriors, say to them, whoever is fearful and whoever is afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned and left. 22,000 of his soldiers that were going to go and fight the 135,000, 22 walked out. 22,000. Okay. That's a lot of people, y'all. Now it's like 10,000 to 135,000. Here's what I want you to understand. Everyone is fearful in a battle. Everyone is fearful, but not everyone will use it as an excuse to quit. And God wanted to go ahead and separate out the people who were going to use it as an excuse to quit, because everyone feels fear in a battle. Drop down to verse 10 of the same chapter, and it said, God's saying to Gideon, he said, hey, listen, Gideon, if you're afraid, I want you to go down to the camp with Purah, your servant. Take Purah with you. We know that Gideon took Purah with him because he was, say it louder, he was afraid. So it's not that he wasn't afraid. he wasn't going to use it as his crutch to quit. Godly leaders know that they don't take the easy way out. They don't take the easy way out. We can all get complacent if we allow ourselves to. But that's when that call of God that's in your life, man, rises up. And you say, no, I'm not taking the easy way out. I'm not just going to let someone else fulfill the call that God told me to do. Because here's the deal. It's not like the will of God is not going to come to pass. You just have to decide if he's going to be able to use you or not. Godly leaders don't take the easy way out. See, sometimes we don't want to deal with the mess of battle, so we would rather just stay on the side. I love this scripture in 2 Timothy 2:20 and 21. It says this. It says, in a well-furnished kitchen, there are not only crystal goblets and silver platters, but waste cans and compost buckets. Some containers used to serve fine meals and others to take out the garbage. Become the kind of container, or let me even insert, become the kind of leader. Become the kind of leader that God can use to present any and every kind of gift to his guests for their blessing. I love this. Every kind of goblet and waste can. In order to have beautiful, you got to deal with messy. You got to deal with messy, but sometimes we don't want to deal with the mess. We just want the promise. But let me just explain to you. I love when I read about Noah and it talks about the rainbow and the promise. And many of us, when we talk about the promise, we're like, oh, the rainbow. Man, I want the promise. How many of you go, man, I want the promise? How many of you want the promises of God? Y'all are like, she's going to trick me. I'm not sure if I'm going to raise my hand or not. We all want the promises of God, but I have to tell you that the promises of God sometimes come like they did with Abraham, where Abraham was given a promise, I'm going to make you a mighty nation. But in order for that to happen, he had to be circumcised. There was a cutting that had to happen. And when there's a cutting that happens in our life, we bleed. It hurts. It's painful. It doesn't feel good. But let me just tell you, godly leaders don't take the easy way out. The promise is worth it. It's worth it because what I've determined is the call of God on my life is not just for me, it's for everyone. Me dealing with my pain, that's my issue. So am I going to make everything just about me, or am I going to fulfill the call of God on my life and do it if I'm hurting or not, or if I feel fear or not? Or am I just going to take the easy way out? See, there was a time where Abraham tried to take the easy way out, and he slept with his servant, and because he did that, he produced an Ishmael. Whenever we try to take a shortcut to God's presence, to God's promise, it will always produce an Ishmael. It will always produce something that should not be produced. And the Midianites are descendants of Ishmael. So here they are fighting all of these battles because of a mistake that somebody made, because they tried to take the easy way out. You can never take the easy way out. When God gives you a promise, it's going to hurt sometimes. It's going to be painful at times. There is no easy way out. Godly leaders, number 7, they don't care about the odds. Godly leaders don't care about the odds. In Judges chapter 7, verse 13, this is the part where Gideon hears about this dream. This was one of the signs that he heard. And so he's going down into the camp where the Midianites are to scope things out, and he's looking around, and he hears this man telling a dream, and this dream helped to give him the confidence. But what I understand about this dream is that godly leaders don't care about the odds. So verse 13 of chapter 7, it says, and when Gideon had come, there was a man who was telling a dream. He was telling this dream to his companion, and he said, I have a dream. And to my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and it came to a tent, and it struck it so that it all fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Then his companion answered, and he said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, and into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. And it says that once Gideon heard this, that he got his confidence even more. That was another sign. But the thing about this is that here we go. Gideon starts off, he's got all these 135,000 that he's fighting against, 32 drops down to 10,000, and then it drops down again. The reason it drops down again, it drops down to 300 now, because the guys go out and God says to him, hey, Gideon, I just want you to understand that the men who go down and when they get a drink of water, I want you to watch how they drink. And if they put their head down in the water and they drink, he goes, I want you to release them. But if they take the water and they bring it up, and in other words, they're still looking around, they're still vigilant, they're still alert, and they drink from their hands, you keep those people. But the other ones, you need to let them go. So it's 135,000 now to 300. Because godly leaders don't care about the odds. As long as God is on their side, that's all that they care about. And in this dream, it's a great place to clap. In this dream, the thing that's so amazing is that the interpretation of the dream is this. In Israel, barley was considered an inferior grain. It was well known that only poor people used barley. It was lower class, less than, you just don't eat barley unless you're poor. So the Israelites, they felt very inferior at this time, but yet that inferior barley is what was going to go in and take down all the tents in the Midianite camp. You see, those tents represented the nomadic ways of the Midianites. So this dream was saying, you're going to go in, even though you feel inferior, even though you feel like you're the least in your father's house, the least of your tribe, even though you've had all these things to deal with, you're still going to overtake the enemy. Patty, in the video, the odds that were against her, 9 places in her body for cancer to show up, and for her to get her last screening and them to not be able to find cancer in her body. How many of you know that when God is with you, who can be against you? The odds don't matter. Godly leaders don't care about the odds. Number 8, godly leaders know who their allies are. They know who their allies are. This to me is probably the thing that has hurt me in my leadership the most, is sometimes I didn't know. Sometimes I didn't know who my allies were. What happened in this story is that Gideon goes in and he's fighting the Midianites, and they get really tired in battle. So they're going in, they're fighting, they come up to this city, and Gideon says to the city, he goes, hey, you guys, my soldiers, the 300 of us, we're fighting in this battle, and we're really tired. We need some nourishment. Could you just give us some bread? Our camp's a long way away. Could you just give us some bread? And they go, wait a second here. If we give you bread and the Midianites defeat you, then they're going to come after us. So we're not going to do anything until we assess who's going to win first. We want to figure out who's going to win this battle, and then we'll help somebody. So he's like, you know what? I want you to remember that you did this to me because I don't need you. I wanted you to be a part of this, but if you're not going to, that's fine. I'll go somewhere else. He goes to another city. The same thing happens in this city. He goes and he says, hey, my men, our camp is a long way away. Can you give us some bread? Can you help us? We need some sustenance. And they go, wait. You're fighting the Midianites. If the Midianites take you over, they're going to come back at us. No, No, we're not giving you anything. We want to know who's going to win the battle before we decide if we're going to help you. And let me just tell you, there are battles that you will face in your life, and I don't want you to get upset about the battle. The battle only serves to prove who is really with you and who is not. Because there is a difference between somebody who is just with you and for you. Somebody who is for you is not waiting for the outcome. They already believe in you. They're actually fighting along with you. You probably wouldn't even have to ask them for bread. They'd already be giving it. Because, see, here's the thing. Loyal is not something that loyal is something that you already were. It just surfaces in the test. Yeah. You don't just all of a sudden become disloyal. No. You already were. Right. Just the test just pulled it out. Right. How many of you know that when we go through a situation or a trial, you will always find out who your Benedict Arnold is? You will always find out who Benedict Arnold is. And here's the truth of the matter, is we kind of already knew that they were a Benedict Arnold, because the thing about Benedict Arnold is that his words, oh, I'm with you, I'm for you, I got you, I'm praying for you, I'm believing for you. His words and his eyes, they didn't match. It's like they're saying all the right words, but there's just this, there's something there, and it doesn't feel right. Don't despise those times, because when you go through a battle, it'll weed those people out. You'll be able to find out who your allies are by who's still with you and who's not. You know, I love what Oprah Winfrey says. She says, lots of people want to ride with you in the limo, but what you want is someone who is willing to take the bus with you when the limo breaks down. That's the people that you want in your life. And time and tests reveal this. You know, Troy and I went through a situation about a year ago that was a big test. How many of you know what I'm talking about? Wave your hands at me if you know what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm not going to go into it. But we went through a situation about a year ago. And there was this one guy who he just felt Benedict Arnoldish. You know, and I didn't have all the proof, but, you know, in your knower, you know. Like kind of in your gut, just something doesn't feel right. And he was just like, oh, Pastor Troy, I just love you and your family. This is the greatest church I've ever been to in my life. And I've been to a lot of churches. And, you know, that kind of is a little clue right there. And, you know, Pastor Troy, I want to help you start campuses all over Charlotte. I have a leadership gift on my life. I want to be there for you. I'm going to pray for you. I'm your biggest cheerleader. Ah, la, 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 la. On and on and on and on. When this situation happened in our life, he doesn't even have the guts or the decency to have a conversation with us. We get an email that says, hey, I don't want my business to be affected, so bye. Never even saw him again. And I never thought I'd be so thankful for a trial or a test in my life, but I am. Do you know why? Because it separated people who didn't need to be, who were just with us. They weren't for us. You know what? And if I'm fighting in a battle and you're not with me, you're pulling me down. So we just kind of have taken on T.D. Jakes' philosophy. You know, sometimes you got to have the gift of goodbye. And if someone leaves you, they were never tied to your destiny in the first place. And so I kind of just thought about it like this. You know what? If you're just with me and you're not for me, I need your seat. I need your seat. That was good right there. Church for that. Number 9, godly leaders don't take credit, they give credit. I love the fact that, you know, whenever a leader does something significant, there's a tendency for people to want to worship that leader. But a godly leader will always point to God. They will always say, no, 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 no. It's about God. It's not about me. It's not about my gift. That's what Gideon did. They kept trying to place this mantle on him. And he said, no, no, no. It's about God. God is the one who has won this battle. And then they tried to put it on his son. He goes, no, 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 not me, not my son, but the Lord. And also, I love the fact that in each time that Gideon would go into battle, you can go through and read his story. Each time before the battle and after the battle, he would always give thanks and credit to God. He understood where his help came from. Godly leaders never take credit. They always give credit. They give credit to the people who are around them, who are working with them, who are serving with them, who are fighting with them, and they give credit to God. Whenever you see a leader that has to take credit, you are looking at an insecure leader. Whenever you see a leader that has to have a title in order to feel important, you are looking at an insecure leader. If you are marked by God, that is all that you need. You don't need somebody else to approve of you. Because passion is what should drive a leader, not a position. Passion. Number 10, godly leaders spot potential. They spot potential. in Judges chapter 8, all through, and even in chapter 7, the first thing I talked about was how, Gideon took Purah with him. But what I didn't tell you was Purah was a very young man. So he takes this very young man with him into battle because he's saying, hey, you know what? I see potential in you. You're not a mighty warrior right now, but I wasn't a mighty warrior when God called me. I was hiding, threshing wheat. But see, young man, I see some potential in you, and I want to pull that potential out of you. So come into battle with me and just kind of look at how I do things. Watch and see how I do things. A godly leader is always willing to pull potential out of other people. Bring and pull that potential out. In chapter 8, verse 14, he goes into the Midianites' camp and he finds this young man, and he says to this young man, come over here. And he sits him down and he talks to him. And he ends up winning this war against the Midianites because he finds out from this young man who had a lot of potential, he finds out the 77 top leaders in the Midianite army, and he takes them down. Because it came from a young man. He saw something in this young man and he pulled it out of him. Godly leaders see potential. He also goes into battle, and at one point he hands the sword to his son. And the Bible says that he was a very, very young man. He hands the sword to his son and he goes, here you go. I want you to go ahead and I want you to take their heads off. And his son was too afraid to do it. And the Bible says it's because he was a youth. He was so afraid. But here's the point. They might be afraid, but give them the sword anyway, because there are more battles to come. And if you get them used to handling the sword, when the next battle comes, they just might use it. So go ahead, give them the sword and take them into battle with you and teach them. Teach them. There are people that are sitting in this room right now, and they're going, man, I don't know how to see the potential in others. Here's the first thing. You got to see potential in yourself. If you can't pull that potential out of you, it's very difficult to pull that out of someone else. I was cooking breakfast a few weeks ago, and my son had a bunch of friends that spent the night, and it seems like every night pretty much we have teenagers spend the night in our house, and that's a good thing most of the time. For the last 30 days, literally, I think there were 3 where we did not have teenagers spend the night at our house. And at one point, it was 14 of them. And I know that's what I said. And so we love our house being open to the young people, and we want to be that house. And so one of the guys was sitting up at the counter as I was cooking breakfast for everyone. And he's a 17-year-old. As a matter of fact, he's watching right now because he's out of town, and I'm talking about you. He's 17 years old. He was sitting up at the counter as I was cooking breakfast. And he calls me a couple different things. He calls me Pastor P, Mrs. P, Mama P. And he says, Mama P, you know what my past looks like. You know all the stuff I've done. And you know that I've only been saved for 3 weeks. He's a kid that my son knew at school, and he started coming to church, got saved, and he's turning his life around. He said, you know I've only been saved for 3 weeks. Why do you let me hang out with your kids? Because you know what I've done. And I looked at him and I said, sweetheart, I don't care what you've done. I see potential in you, and you're going to do big things for God. He doesn't care about what happened yesterday. You hear me? He doesn't care about what happened yesterday. So he came to me a few days after that, and he said to me, Mama P, I want to ask you a question. What would it take for me to become a pastor? I said, sweetheart, the biggest thing you got to know, there's a lot of stuff that can be taught, but character cannot be taught. You've got to have godly character. And the other things, if you're willing to have your character line up with God's word, will help teach you. And he goes, that's what I want to do. I want to be a pastor. I want to be a pastor. Some of us, there's a call of God in our life, but we don't think we're smart enough, gifted enough, perfect enough, buttoned up enough, tough enough. So we aren't doing what God has called us to do. But I just want you to know that when he called Gideon, he wasn't any of those things, but he still wants you. Will you stand up on your feet with me? There are some people that are in this room today, and I want you to hear when I say this, and you could be watching right now live stream. Don't try to stay small just so you won't have critics. Do not try to stay small just so you won't have critics. There is a big call and a big plan on your life. I love this quote by Benedict Arnold. I want to read it to you. It's actually become my favorite quote. Can you guys put it up on the screen? Here we go. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how strong the man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. What I want to ask you today is, will you dare greatly? Will you dare greatly? I want you to know we're going to dismiss the service, but there are going to be people up front. Some of our leaders I want to ask to come up front. And if you have not accepted Jesus into your life, and you say, man, I want to do that today, I haven't done that, and you're just thinking about all the things in your life that just aren't right, let me just tell you, don't worry about what's not right, because Jesus is the only one who would pay full price for as-is merchandise. He paid full price for you just as you are. And it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've been, who you did it with. God paid full price for you. So if that's you, and you want to come up here, and our leaders will be here to pray with you, we're not going to keep you long. Or if you say, you know what, I just need to tell somebody, I just need somebody to connect with me, that I need to dare greatly. I've been hiding out in the wine press, and I'm ready to step out because there's somebody waiting for me. There's people in this world who need to hear what I have to say, who have a gift of leadership that I'm going to help pull out of them. If that's you too, as we dismiss, please just come up front and we will pray with you. We will be here with you. And you know what? Some of you, just truthfully, some of you daring greatly would be signing up for a life group. So I encourage you to do that as you leave. And Dara, who is here worshiping with us this weekend, she'll be out in the lobby. So if you want to meet her after service, go out there. But man, I just encourage you, go do what you do and dare greatly. We will see you next week, Freedom House.
I am the child, you call me chosen.